So, number one, governments need to get involved. Number two, customer service always matters. Always has mattered, actually. Again, let's go back to the 1800s. Again, back to London. Now, imagine what London was like at this time. You didn't have a piped water supply. You were only a couple of generations away from buying your water from water sellers in the street. Now, Charles Dickens, who wrote Oliver Twist, who wrote, Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens was living in London at the time, and he'd paid a premium. He paid a premium to have his water delivered on a Monday, because what you did was you paid your water and it was delivered to you on whatever day you went to. But Monday was the day that the rich people went for, because Monday was wash day. So if you could wash on a Monday, it showed that you were affluent. And there wasn't a Thames Water in those days. I'm ex-Thames Water. But back in those days, Thames Water was called New River Company. And Charles Dickens wrote a complaint to the New River Company. The supply of water is absurdly inefficient. I am usually left on a Monday morning as dry as if there were no river company, New River Company, which I sometimes devoutly wish was the case. What an eloquent complaint letter. We don't get complaint letters like that nowadays. We get them much blunter, and they come on Twitter. Modern day, of course, customer service is still something that matters. Another little cartoon there of someone calling themselves a customer says they want something called service. Actually, that's, I think, fairly relevant to the water industry, no matter where you are in the world today. Next point, I think established wisdom should always be challenged. It's always good to challenge established wisdom. So back in the early 1800s, people believed that disease was spread by smell. They believed that there was this thing called miasma. Miasma. Florence Nightingale even believed that scarlet fever could be caught through the smell. And actually, it was the pioneering work of a doctor called John Snow, who, when there were 4 cholera outbreaks across 20 years in London, each one killing about 20,000 people in a relatively small city. These were catastrophic events. And John Snow realized, he basically looked that middle picture, he looked at the map of London, and he said, well, where are these outbreaks happening, and why are they happening? And he realized that the outbreaks were happening around water pumps. And so he went out there with his stopcock and he turned these pumps off. And he was ridiculed for this. And you can see from the cartoon, there's a little boy saying, oh, look, they're turning off the water. Or he's turning off I think he says it's turning off the tuberculosis. They're turning off the disease. And it was joked about. But actually, this was the first work that was determining that actually disease is being spread through the water. It is not being spread through the smell. And he was laughed at. And you know what? There's lots of examples. Canterbury, in 1838, the Black Death swept through the UK, and one of the few places that wasn't touched was the monastery in Canterbury. And everybody believed that this was because the monks had prayed and been protected. And you know what? Maybe that is what happened. But maybe also it's because they actually had some settlement ponds, which were natural filters that basically filtered the water 7 times before the monks ever drank it. Activated sludge. Arden and Lockhart invented the activated sludge process back 101 years ago. In 1914, they invented the activated sludge process, which we all now use. It's well known as a global treatment process. But the activated sludge process was described in 1954. Lockhart, on his deathbed, when interviewed about the great things he'd done in inventing this process, he said, you know what, we were regarded as revolutionary and unorthodox in inventing this process, because basically they were taking wastewater, mixing it with sewage sludge and blowing air through it to try and invent a process to clean wastewater. It's mad. It's absolutely mad. Yet, that established wisdom, that challenging that wisdom is what drove this forward. If I had time, I'd talk about PHAs, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to gallop on. People's habits change. Bathhouses. This is a great story. I'd love to spend 15 minutes talking about bathhouses, but just very quickly. Back in 1158, there were 18 bathhouses in London, 18 of them. What you do is you get up in the morning and you go to the bathhouse. They were communal places. You'd bath with husbands and wives would go there. You'd sit in these great big pools of water that were heated by the bakery next door. Children would run through the streets declaring the bathhouse water was ready. You'd be in there and there'd be floating herbs in the water. It would be smelly. They'd bring food to you. It was like a modern-day spa. The day before he was coronated, Henry VIII went to a bathhouse with 26 of his friends and celebrated bathhouses with his friends. Yet, in 1846, 20 years later, he banned bathhouses completely. The revolution that had happened in changing people's habits Happened in just 20 years, and bathhouses were banned. And the reason they were banned, next picture on, is because they were deemed as immoral. These were places where people were doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And that was resulting in a disease called syphilis, which was sweeping through the country at that stage. Whether it's Ebola in our current time, or AIDS of 20 years ago, or cholera of the 1800s, or syphilis back in the 18th century, this is the 15th century. You know, disease is coming through. And you know what it took? 200 years before being clean became something that you would be proud of. I've got a quote here from 1674. Sir John Flower wrote a book called The History of Cold Bathing. Okay? So you've got to remember, at this time, people didn't get clean. They didn't wash. It wasn't a natural thing to wash. And he wrote, "A cold bath excites the drowsy spirits and makes the stupid mind powerfully excited." Don't you just love that? I think it's great. Have a bath. It'll make your stupid people in your family a little less stupid. I haven't got time to talk about baths to showers and back again, but showers were deemed as abhorrent things that pregnant women in particular should not go near a shower. They were introduced into the UK through Harrods, but another story for another time. There are always going to be topics we're afraid to talk about. Now, the next 30 seconds, 60 seconds are probably going to be a bit squeamish, and I apologize to you for this, but work with me, because the very point I want to make is that there are always topics that we're a little bit afraid to talk about. So the first one was actually around toilet paper. We all get junk mail through the post. It's called BUMF. And the reason it's called BUMF is because it stands for bum fodder. People used to use it to wipe their bottoms after they defecated. We now move to some ridiculous types of toilet paper. And you know what the point was around toilet paper? It was something you didn't talk about. It was only invented in 1936 and was only sold at Harrods as a special thing for gentlemen's noses. Nobody mentioned that you might use it to wipe your bottom. Similarly, feminine products, feminine hygiene products were not accepted, were not something that we could talk about. They were a taboo subject. And actually, when they were first invented back in the late 1800s, Johnson & Johnson invented something called Lister's towels. But it failed. It was a complete commercial failure because they were not able to advertise it. And you know what? I think we've got some taboo subjects today. There are practices we adopt for cleaning after we've been to the toilet, which use enormous quantities of water, and actually we shy away from addressing many of these because it's a taboo subject that actually, in conferences like this, it's easier not to talk about those issues, and maybe we should. Maybe we actually should do that. Next event. Catastrophic events drive change. It doesn't matter whether it's a drought, a flood, or climate change. These things are what will always drive change. There was a drought in the UK in 1898 that meant London ran out of water, and that was the first time people started talking about bringing water from Wales into London, bringing it 350 miles, and back then that was madness. It's madness now. And that point actually resulted in the nationalisation of the water industry when London ran out of water. This is one of my favourite pictures. I was in Thames Water at the time. And trust me, we were in a drought in 2012. A catastrophic event came through. We were getting ready for the drought. We prayed for rain, and on the day we announced the drought, it rained. We stood up and we said to people, a little bit of rain doesn't mean the drought's over. It rained for 6 weeks. Eventually we stood up and we've made this picture something we're very proud of. Big events showcase change. So just as catastrophic events drive change, big events showcase change. Whether it's the Great Exhibition of 1851, where public toilets were the first time these were presented. This was the first time the public could use a flushing toilet was in 1851. There's a phrase called spend a penny. And it was called spend a penny because you spent a penny to use the public toilets at the Great Exhibition in 1851. In fact, it was only a decision made by the exhibitors at the last minute to allow women to use the flushing toilets. It was deemed that it wasn't appropriate for women to use flushing toilets. Queen Victoria was on the throne at that time. And today we have the same issues. The Millennium Dome was the first time in the UK when waterless urinals were presented. We have the Blackwater treatment plant that was used where water reuse was first applied at scale in Northern Europe at the London 2012 Olympics. So my last few comments, and I know my time's run out, give me one more minute, please, is to sort of sum up. Some things we're going to get wrong, okay? And I think baby cages was a pretty bad idea. But no matter what we get wrong, I think we must persevere and we must learn from our mistakes. And here's a little picture of what happened in Sweden on the first day that they changed driving on the left to driving on the right. Fortunately, they ploughed on with it, and it's not so bad now. However, despite we're going to get a few things wrong, you know what? We have to manage our risks sensibly. And this idea of testing bulletproof vests by wearing one seems a little bit stupid to me. And I guess my last slide is something around technology. I'm a technophile. I love technology. And I think that technology is probably the secret that's going to help us address the problems that we need to face collectively, globally, as a sector, to ensure that the future generations can look back over us in 500 years' time and take some lessons that we've done. Thank you very much. Now you'll note I've not moved, because part of the power of being on the podium is if you don't move, they can't do anything about it. No, it's because I've been asked to chair the rest of the morning, so I am delighted to introduce up Ruth Matthews to come up and take the lead on the next session. Ruth, I'm going to let you call your panel up and introduce them as needed.